Awesome espresso again. Hey, let's start the day with another chart. This chart is the top 10 Chinese cities by GDP and market capitalization, and then looking at that as a percent of the GDP. So what do I mean by this? Well, first is the bars of this chart we can see is the GDP by city that we have information on China. We can see Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are the largest cities as far as GDP. And we can see that Guangzhou and Shenzhen, neighbor cities, are very, very close. Now, the next part of this is that we can also see that Beijing, though the political capital of the country, generates slightly less GDP than Shanghai. Now, what we can also see from this is that if we look at the red bar in this, or the red line in this chart, we can see that actually what I've done is taken all the companies that were listed in the stock market that have their headquarters in these cities, and I added up their market capitalization, the size of those companies. And then I looked at the size of those companies, the market capitalization relative to the GDP of that city. And what we can see is, let's take Guangzhou as an example. We can see a very, very low bar, and that market cap to GDP is a percentage, and we can see that on the right-hand scale. And we can see about 100% in the case of Guangzhou. But if we look at another extreme, Beijing, we can see that the market capitalization of the companies that show their headquarters as being in Beijing is 700% of Beijing GDP. So we can see that Beijing, though it's the second largest city as far as GDP output, it's got a huge number of listed companies that are very big. We can look on the other side and see that Guangzhou is a city that has pretty good GDP production, but the number of listed companies and the size of those listed companies are tiny. Now, all the way to the end, we can see Hangzhou, and Hangzhou is where we have the tech, a booming tech space there, and therefore the companies that are from Hangzhou are seeing that their market capitalization is rising, even though Hangzhou is not a huge GDP contributor to overall GDP of China. But since I was in Shenzhen last week, let's take a look at Shenzhen. And what do we see? We see that it is the second highest city amongst all the cities in China. I say all because these are the top 10. We could go below, but let's say of the top 10 cities, we can see it's the second highest market cap to GDP. So Shenzhen is moving along to try to push up its market capitalization. The number of companies is already more than in Shanghai, and the market capitalization now relative to the GDP of Shenzhen is actually higher than Shanghai. So that gives you a picture of what's happening with GDP and stock market listings by cities in China. Keep learning and keep smiling.